give it a minute to start. Cool. Hey everybody, today is episode 1 of Unbreakable Radio. I'm really excited about our guest today. She's one of my wife's best long-term friends, Regan Simpson, and I'll let her introduce herself. Regan, what's going on?
Oh man, that is a big question, but what is going on? So I live in Colorado. I've lived here for the last 3 years, but I'm originally from Kansas. I'm an ultra runner who hasn't run an ultra marathon in a long time. But yeah, I can kind of start at the beginning there. But I was a Division I athlete in college. I rode, and that's how I met Laura, I'm so forever grateful for that. But during that entire time, I was a runner, and I ran in high school. Rowing in college was just kind of the opportunity to be a Division I athlete because I couldn't run necessarily at that level. Like I didn't want to go to a smaller school, but I still wanted to be an athlete. So I did that for 3 years. And then after I graduated college, I started getting into marathon running and ultra marathon running. And there was really no seamless transition between the two. I just kind of hopped into a run one day or 50 miles. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it, but like rip the Band-Aid off really quick. And then I kind of got bit with the adventure bug. So I lived in Manhattan for a couple of years after, I'd say about 1.5 years after graduating from college. And then I moved to Colorado with no job lined up. I did have a place to live that I found a month before I moved.
Okay.
But I kind of went on a leap of faith, and I'd moved out here, and for about 3 months I worked at, it was like a chocolate shop. It was just some small little job that I did for the time being that paid the bills. And while I was there, I got the opportunity to go work at a campground halfway up Pikes Peak. So there's no road access. You have to hike or run to get there, which I would hike up and run down. But yeah, it was 6 miles, and I lived there. So I lived there and I worked there, and it was fully off-grid, fully remote living. But the funny thing is that a lot of people probably wouldn't understand is that it was also an incredibly busy job. There was a lot of people there all the time because it was an incredibly busy place to hike to, because people were hiking to Pikes Peak all the time. There's thousands of people that do that every year. So we would always have so many guests, and it was just like wake up, work, sneak out for a run, come back, work, go to bed at 10 o'clock, after working, and not having any of that time apart. And I was using running during that time as my time to get away. Sure. So if I needed a break, I would go on like a 4-hour run to get a break.
Pretty unconventional concept of a break for most people.
Yeah, exactly. It was exhausting. Like it was, I was definitely exhausting myself more than anything. I should have just been like running off and finding a place to sit behind a rock for 2 hours. But instead I was just using that time to run, and it did give me a mental break. But I also lived with 2 very big time ultra runners. One of them was a professional, and the other one was also very high level too. So they did a lot of training. So in my mind, I was like, well, it's normal to do that, so I'm going to do that. And I only did that for about half the year. Then I kind of toned back the training a little bit because I realized that it wasn't serving me up there. But then I finished out my year there, and then I did a couple runs when I was up there, like a couple races. I did a 50-mile race in Leadville, and then I want to say I did a marathon too. But then when I got done with bar camp, I did 800 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. So I intended to do the entire thing, which was 2,600 miles, but I kept getting sick. Like at every turn, I would get sick. And I knew it was my body or the universe or something being like, dude, you got to stop. You got to get off here.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it just wasn't the time for me to be out there. And ever since then, I have been running a lot still. But this summer, I did a lot. I was training really hard, and I realized that I had a couple of strength imbalances. Okay. And they basically came to fruition this summer. So I'm probably not going to say this right, but sciatica pain.
Sure. Yep. Sciatica.
Right? Sciatica. Yep. So I have this big, massive sciatica problem. And then I have something with my ankle because of overpronation. And it's not like I've always had these imbalances, but right now because I ran so much this summer that they finally just got bad enough that I feel them now.
Yeah, sure.
So what I'm doing right now is just learning how to recover and heal from that, while also just being able to run for 30 minutes a day and being happy with it, not thinking that I need to go out and train for a marathon at every turn or run for 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day to make it worthwhile. And it's been really fun to kind of, I don't know, maybe not fun, but it's been good to reevaluate my relationship with it right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you think that, I think without getting too far ahead of ourselves, how do you think that it's been to maybe readjust your relationship to running with these shorter durations? I know that for a lot of high level performers, it can be difficult to, come back down to maybe what would be considered, healthy or more normal in terms of volume compared to some of these sports. Do you feel like it's helping you find a different type of enjoyment in running?
Yes, I really think it is. And I think that a lot of other ultra runners can agree with this. A lot of times the relationship with running can get super unhealthy to where you think that you not necessarily have something to prove to other people, but that you have something to prove to yourself. And if you don't get the opportunity to kind of look at that, then you're going to keep doing it. And I hear stories and I see it all the time of people who are incredibly injured. I mean, they're full on injured and they're taking pain meds or cortisone shots and just going out, continuing to do it and wrecking their, yeah, exactly. And it's because they can't slow down and stop. And that's how I was too. Like this summer, I went through this long time where I realized that my training and that at that level was not serving me, because it was also, for me, I was using it as a distraction because I was running for so many hours a day. There's a lot of other things internally I needed to work on, but I was just covering it up with that.
Yeah, like running away, like kind of literally.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
It's like if I'm in the mountains all day and I'm like just trying to grind and get up the mountain and then run down away from the lightning before the storms come in for the afternoon, and then I'm sleeping the rest of the day, I don't have time to think about anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think touching back on that and kind of listening to you talk about like using maybe kind of extreme ultramarathon running to maybe as a way to not feel certain things or as like a coping mechanism. I think that's true for a lot of us in, like you see that a lot in heavy weightlifting or strength sports even. I think it's a similar thing of like, you can kind of put all of your energy and emotional self into the bar or into, kind of this pursuit of competition and really use it as a pretty solid avoidance strategy for maybe things that, maybe there's things we need to avoid, but maybe there's things that we need to confront more head on. I think on this kind of mindset and kind of emotional mental approach to sport, going back to, you starting running in high school and with using running as a way to get into collegiate athletics, what was your relationship with running like? What was it about that type of sport in high school, do you think, that really fed you? And then how did that feed into your career going into college as a rower?
Looking back right now, the number one thing, I mean, besides the fact that I really liked it and it made me feel really good. It stoked that competitive fire in me. And I was also good at running. So I had that, I don't want to say that reward system. Like I liked it and I was good at it. So I'd go out there and I'd do it. And then I would be praised for it. I'd be celebrated for it.
It's good to feel skillful, right?
Yeah. And it was good to feel, it was good to be good at something. But at the same time, like I loved running. I loved the feeling of freedom. I loved the feeling of, just exercising in general and being healthy. I love the feeling of working towards something and having goals. But I think that I was 12 years old when I started running. I didn't have the tools necessary to keep it healthy per se. And I think it kind of got out of control to where if I had a bad race, then I would feel bad, I tied it into my identity too much. And I think that it continued into rowing a little bit, but the good thing with rowing is that I had to find a way to make it not tie into my identity, because at that point the stakes were a lot higher, and the way that we were trained was it wasn't so much like, oh, have fun, oh, you have a knee injury, you can't run for 3 days. Like it wasn't like that at all. So I had to learn how to set my own boundaries and stand up for myself. And I think that experience really, and kind of like take my identity away from my performance.
Sure.
And that was really nice.
How do you think that kind of learning to separate your identity from sport and still participate at a high level? Because I think, rowers, I think arguably of a lot of collegiate athletics do such a tremendous volume of training, right? It's like your practice hours, like what you do for conditioning and what you do for your sport are the same. Whereas, you know, if we're looking at, you know, maybe football or soccer or something, it's like we have our time on the field in the sporting specific region, and then we have our time kind of training for the sport.
Yeah.
How do you think that separating your identity allowed you to continue to pursue this very repetitive, really difficult thing, which I think is similar to running, right? And still have this outlet of, you know, running as a sport that felt good to you. Kind of like, did rowing give you that same degree of feeling skillful and feeling like you were praised for it? And how did you make that transition, you know, mentally and emotionally?
Yeah, I think that I just had to find a lot of other reasons that I was in it. I had to find a lot of other reasons that I enjoyed it, as opposed to just getting like needing to prove myself. And, you know, we experienced a lot of that, of like heat racing, of competing against our own teammates, of just like constant, just go, 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 work as hard as you can, no days off. And obviously it's kind of detrimental in a way, but I was able to get through that, and to be able to constantly be able to do that hard work and not be torn down by it, by just finding other reasons to be there and being grateful for the fact that I had my team, which was an awesome community. I met some of my best friends through rowing, and showing up at practice wasn't just to work really hard all the time, which it was, but it was also to have that connection with my friends and teammates as well. And, you know, I think that I could have done a lot better with some of my mindset tactics, but I also was studying sports psychology at that time too. So I was also learning mindfulness a lot, and that helped. And I mean, at that time in my life too, I was drinking a lot, except for in dry season. I never drank during dry season, but I obviously wasn't taking it as seriously as I could have, because if I was taking it seriously, I wouldn't be drinking in the summertime when I was supposed to be training and getting a lot better. So I think that having that college kid mindset kind of just made me not necessarily care as much, which was both good and bad. It was good because I didn't tie my identity to it, but it was also bad because a lot of times I wasn't doing what I should have been doing.
Almost like, what's this balance? I think about this a lot, which is like, what's this balance between like healthy detachment and
yes.
also you know, like dedication? And then how do we, because it's like, I think if we're too emotionally attached to an outcome, that can really defeat performance goals. But if we're not emotionally in it enough, then also that can be kind of detrimental. If you know, you mentioned you were studying sports psychology. Is that what you studied in college primarily, or was that like independent study that you were doing on your own?
So I did study psychology in college. I have a Bachelor of Science in psychology, but I also interned with the director of sports psychology at K-State for, I would say it was a year and a half. Yeah. So it wasn't like super intense stuff I was doing, but I was able to shadow him and go in and actually talk to him about a lot of the concepts. And that's the first time I'd ever heard about mindfulness, which is kind of cool, because now that's a really big thing about what I practice in my daily life, but also what I'm hoping, or not hoping to, but what I'm going to implement into my coaching and what I do in my career. But yeah, it was nice to have that ability to be able to learn about all of that stuff and then be able to bring it into my own practice. But yeah, it was cool. And studying psychology as a whole was just kind of nice for that.
Yeah, because it's like a double-edged sword of like, it helps you understand yourself, but also helps you understand other people.
Exactly.
What were your primary takeaways from your internship with sports psychology at K-State?
I've never thought about that.
If you have, mindfulness sounds like probably one big one.
Yeah, definitely. I know, you know what? I know what the biggest takeaway is that mindset is everything. The way you look at what you're doing and the way you believe about it, the way you talk about it, that is everything. And I never thought about it until that point. So, and I still, after that, didn't really implement it as much as I should have, or as much as I could have. But now, as I'm getting deeper into some other work, looking back at that, I'm like, oh, that was when I was first introduced to it. And so now I'm able to kind of pull some of that stuff back and integrate it with what I'm doing now.
Yeah, very cool. So I think you touched on so many things that I want to hear about. I think going back to you kind of talking about drinking during the off season as your time on the team. One thing that I've been really impressed by, just like knowing you over the past few years and kind of watching you grow as an athlete and practitioner, is kind of you talk about sobriety a lot, and you've written a couple articles on it. So I think what is your journey with sobriety and your relationship, you know, to yourself and to the psychology of your sport? How has that journey been, and maybe what do you want to share with us about that journey?
Yeah, well, overall, it's been completely life-changing.
Yeah, how so?
So I stopped drinking a year ago, November 19th of 2019, I believe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I hadn't been necessarily drinking as much as I ever have. It's like, you know, when I was in college, a lot of us drink a lot. It's just kind of what college kids do in a way. I mean, let's be honest, but
yeah, for
but
sure.
yeah, as I got into my adult years, I was definitely drinking a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also starting to notice that it wasn't as fun for me anymore. It wasn't just like going out and having fun. I was just doing it to do it. And I realized that like, it made me feel awful. I mean, my hangovers were a lot worse. I definitely was in a really rough part of my life. Like I was definitely in a very depressive phase this time last year. I was in a very like crossroads of my life, not even a crossroads. I didn't even know what I was doing with my life. I remember driving to work one day and just thinking, there's got to be more than this. Like I felt just like really out of it. And it wasn't that I was hungover or anything. It was just an overall sense of existential dread is what I like to call it.
Yeah.
And I had been depressed before, and this was different. It was like an apathetic depressed, you know, I was just like, I can't really feel anything. And there was just a lot. Like I had to change a lot in my life. A lot of my beliefs weren't serving me. A lot of what I was doing in my life wasn't serving me. And I was like, I don't even know where to start. So I started by doing a morning routine and like spending the hour every day, like journaling and reading and meditating and doing all these things to improve myself. And then about 2 weeks into that, I was like, well, my next step, I have to stop drinking. And that was definitely a difficult thing because I was like, well, if I stop drinking, are people going to say, oh, like what happened? Oh, you're an alcoholic. And it's like, that's not true. You don't have to be an alcoholic to stop drinking.
Sure. You don't have to have like a substance abuse problem to benefit from being more mindful about your consumption.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I was just like, you know, I was really hungover one day after the last time I drank. And I said, I never have to feel this way again if I don't want to. I literally did this to myself. No, like I didn't just get sick because I caught a bug. I didn't just get like knocked in the head by somebody. Like I feel this way because I did it to myself. Yeah. I was like, I don't have to do that anymore. So, and I was also still kind of hungover at that time, or the moment that I did stop drinking, like the moment I decided that I was going to stop. And I kind of had that pink cloud, they call it like sobriety is what it's called. But I was like, you know, that just seems really exciting to not have to feel this way ever again. But I've thought that before, you know, like when you wake up in the morning one day and you're like, never drinking again, but it's just a joke and you're going to drink again. Well, me, like I definitely had that experience a lot, but this time it was a lot different. And I was like, you know what, I'm dedicated to bettering my life. And I think that this is going to be a really good way to do it. And yeah, I gave it up and I never looked back. I never had, like, once I decided I was done with it, I was done with it. And it has improved my life in so many ways, like even outside of sports. Mm-hmm. Just the fact that I don't feel good, or that I feel good every morning. And if I don't feel good, it's because I'm sleep deprived or I'm sick. It's not because I actually did something to myself.
Right.
If I have a problem or an issue that I need to work through, I actually have to face it head on. I can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to have a drink and then go to bed. And, you know, because you have that drink and you're like, oh, okay, like it doesn't seem so bad anymore. But then the next day, the problem's still there.
Yeah. You still wake up to this whatever behemoth you had in front of you that you were trying to avoid. Do you like maybe this concept of like ownership and of responsibility, kind of like, you know, you use this language of I realized that I did this to myself and that it was a mindset shift. What was different? Like if it's articulatable, like what was different about that time versus maybe other times where you were, you know, had said like, oh, I'll never drink again. Like what was the line for you internally, do you think, that was committed and that has kept you committed?
I just shifted it on an identity level. And I've noticed I've always been able to do that for things that like, I'll do things and I'll do things and I'll do things, even if they're not serving me. And then there is an actual point that everything I've ever given up, I remember that point where I said, no more. And then when I say that no more, then I can make that identity shift. And, you know, it's easy from there. And I think a lot of times, especially with alcohol and other substances, even caffeine, a lot of people, when they want to give it up, it's difficult to do that because the shift isn't on an identity level. So it's like, well, I'll just try to stop drinking, but the temptation is still there and you're still around situations where people are going to offer it to you and it's hard to say no. There's a lot of reasons why it's hard, and I agree and I see it.
Yeah.
But when you do shift it on an identity level, then it's like, if someone offers it to you or it's right in front of your face or you're tempted sometimes, it's like, well, I'm not going to do it. Like, it's just not what I do. But that was definitely it for me, was that shift on the identity level and just knowing. It's like that deep internal knowing that was just it. Like, I'm just done.
Mm-hmm. What would your advice be? Like, the language you use, I think, like with a couple of things, which is, you realize that it wasn't serving you. Mm-hmm. I think that concept of like, how are my actions panning out, and what am I doing that is serving me, and what am I doing that's not serving me? And then you also use this language of, on an identity level, how would you, because I think, maybe some of us aren't there yet, or some of us haven't maybe experienced what you're talking about when you say that. I think, I can definitely feel or relate to what you mean, but what would your advice be, maybe to those of us that haven't been there, or haven't maybe thought about how things tie into personal identity, to those of us wanting to make a change at the identity level? What would you recommend?
I mean, I'd recommend looking at who you want to be and the path you want to take. And you don't have to know it exactly, but you can kind of have a good idea of where you want your life to go and what you want to do and how you want to feel. And if you're doing something that doesn't make you feel that way, then that means it's not serving you. That means that it is holding you back. And it's because you can, let's say, here's your trajectory right here. So I guess it's a podcast. I don't know if people can see that, but your trajectory could go up. Like, you want to improve yourself. Like, you want to grow your business. You want to feel better. You want to improve emotionally, physically. There's so many different ways. But then there's also the path that you could take where that's not happening. Or you're even getting worse. Because honestly, I have the belief that if you're not growing, you don't stay the same. No one stays the same,
Stagnation is kind of like a type of decay almost. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if there is something that, and like, I'm definitely still have those things right now that I'm working on, but a lot of times it is substances for a lot of people, or it's eating unhealthy, or it's not exercising, or not implementing these healthy habits, or getting rid of unhealthy habits. Mm-hmm. But when you think about the person that you want to be and the life that you want to live, or how you want to feel, or what you want to do, and you have a habit that's not going to take you in that direction, that's definitely my advice for that is just look at it, look at the direction it's taking you. And you can spend a lot of time in the illusion or the idea that, it's okay, it doesn't really hurt me that bad. And honestly, people have to figure it out on their own. Like, you might need to have that thought, like, oh, this isn't good for me, but it's probably not hurting me. And sometimes you can have that and then switch it right away, like, oh my gosh, like, I need to, that's not the person I want to be, so I can just change that right now. But sometimes, like in my situation, it took me years of like, well, this isn't really that good for me, but it's probably not holding me back from being the person that I want to be. And if it is, I don't really care right now. Right. It happens. Yeah, like, it all happens on an individual basis. But I guess instead of saying on an identity level, which is kind of a deeper concept, but just looking at if it's taking you in the direction that you want to go.
Yeah. And I think like what you touched on, like you summarize so well, I think, this idea of things that are like simple but not easy, which is, it's like simple enough to look. And I think we all have those things, right? Like, myself included, of, where you're doing it and you've got like that tiny voice internally that's like, you shouldn't be doing this, like, stop what you're doing. And we kind of, have maybe this overconfident or more egocentric thing that's like, oh, it's fine. Like, it's not damaging me. And maybe sometimes it takes, I think maybe for some of us, it's like an event that holds up that mirror. But I think what you said, which is that everybody has to come to it themselves, is so true. And I know, for myself and others, like, there have been things that I've done that I'm sure have been like, that are, that have been like unhealthy for me, that then I've like stopped doing. And I'm sure that to the people around me in my life, they probably saw me doing those things and were like, dude, what are you like? I think sometimes we can see those things for other people really easily, but it's like harder to see them for ourselves. How do you think, like, that same concept kind of moving into your time with ultra marathons, and then how you said, like, you stepped out of doing less volume and have like readjusted your attitude to having a more healthy relationship to running. Do you think that those skills are related for you? This kind of like, it sounds like yourself in like a really astounding way that maybe a lot of us don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think being able to I mean, it all connects because giving up alcohol and being able to be sober and to look at my stuff head on has allowed me to see that I had a need to prove myself. And I was also tying who I was to what I did. So running, for instance, or running really far. And now, you know, I'm really grateful actually for the injuries that I do have, because being able to take a step back and reevaluate it, because I do want to, you know, get back into ultra running, but I don't want to do it from a place of I have to do it because of whatever reason. Like, I don't want to ever approach it like I have to do it because I have to get this run done because that's just what ultra runners do, or I have to, it has to look good on Strava, which is, I don't know if you've heard of Strava, but it's I deleted my Strava because I was like, that's just, I can't do it anymore. Like, I don't need anyone to, I don't need to run from the place of thinking people are going to see it.
Right. Yeah. You're not like running for the gram or whatever, right? Like
that's what Strava basically is running.
Like that idea. Yeah.
Dude, that's exactly what it is though. It's like, oh, it'll look really good on Strava, like if I do this really fast workout. So yeah, that was, I mean, that's just like a little like subsection of it. But yeah, that was a big part, was deleting that. But being able to look at it now from a part of running for enjoyment, and also knowing that I don't have anything to prove to myself and I don't have anything to prove to others. And I don't need to do something outside of myself, like achieve a marathon finish or qualify for the Boston Marathon or finish a 100-mile run because of something, like because I want to feel that validation and that achievement, you know, and like get that high of like, yeah, I did it, which it is still fun to celebrate that kind of stuff. But I want to do it from a place of, you know, I set a goal and I want to accomplish it. I want to achieve it, but not to make it mean anything about who I am as a person.
Yeah. Yeah. Like goal fulfillment over like approval for, you know, social need or for ego kind of like directed.
For ego purposes, for sure. Yeah.
What do you think? Like, I think a lot of us walk around with this like feeling of needing to prove ourselves, and maybe like aren't fully aware of like that's even like a way, like a mode that we're operating out of, or like a need that we think we have. Where do you think that need for you came from? Like, because that's kind of, you talked about that maybe early on, like with competition and sport, like this idea of proving yourself. Do you think that came from a particular place, or, you know, not the world, right? It's like, we've got social media and you can always see somebody like better than you or bigger, prettier or whatever, you know, like there's always something like, and I say this with, you know, air quotes, but like, there's always someone more at a thing than you. And I think, yeah, our culture is really engineered to make us feel pretty shit about ourselves, and then to make us do things or buy things in order to make up for our deficiencies. So what was your journey like, you know, with that, and where do you think maybe some of those feelings came from, and how have you beat them?
Honestly, you summed it up really well. I think that it's just our society and it's just our culture, and it is stuff that is just passed down to us. And especially now with social media, which we didn't have that when we were little kids. So we had obviously like, we had like our, you know, like our parents, we had society, and we just had, you know, all these other things. But now with social media, it's definitely a lot worse. But, you know, I can't think of a particular instance where that had kind of came from, but I do know that before the age of 7 years old, we are just like pure subconscious minds, and we're just like absorbing everything we hear. So, you know, if you hear someone say like, oh, well, you need to be better than this person at that, or you hear, you know, people around you talking about being better than other people at something, or needing to beat someone, or needing to do this and achieve this and accomplish this. Like, you know, we don't have the filters before we're 7 years old to be able to actually understand what's going on and to like decide what of that we want to keep and what we don't want to keep. So we just absorb all of that. And then when we start getting older, and even as adults, especially as adults, we're operating from those beliefs a lot of times. So we're like, you know, operating from these programmings of like, we don't even know where it comes from. So yeah, like, wait, why do I feel the need to validate myself? Why do I feel the need to prove my worth by doing this? It's like, you know what, you may not have an actual like one event that you can think of, and some people do, but a lot of it's just like what has been programmed into our minds, what's been shoved in there. And then, you know, the work of being an adult is actually finding that and going, wait a minute, like that's not helping me. That's not how I want to be. That's not making me feel good. So how can I change that?
Yeah, it's like we spend like our whole like formative years like of just being a sponge and absorbing this information, and then the work of being an adult, right? Whoa. the work of being an adult is then like that we have to untether or like uncover like all of this shit that the world has caked us with,
Yeah.
and then somehow make sense of like, yeah, what of this serves me and what of it doesn't serve me, right?
Yeah.
I think on that, like, you know, and parsing out like knowing oneself and knowing the direction that one wants to go, it sounds like you've got some pretty exciting things with coaching coming up. And with, I know you mentioned you were taking a neurolinguistics programming course. Where does kind of your heart with that stuff stem from, and what do you hope to accomplish with some of those things? Slash, can you explain to us what neurolinguistic programming is in the first place?
Yes. So, okay, neurolinguistic programming is, try to think of a good definition for it, but it's basically using the language of the mind to be able to program our minds to achieve the results that we want to achieve. So the idea behind neurolinguistic programming is that our words don't describe our world, they determine it.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. So it has a bunch of like programs and techniques and like all this methodology, and it stems from a lot of it's psychology. Like a lot of what I'm learning, I'm like, wow, this is pretty much exactly what I learned when I was in college. And it's cool because I'm able to, I think it's a lot easier for me to
build on these skills.
Yeah, exactly. And that, but yeah, in terms of coaching, I am doing mindset coaching, and I'm still pretty new into it right now. I'm still figuring it out. This whole last year has been an entire journey of entrepreneurship, because I decided that's what I not necessarily want or only want to do, but like that's what I'm here to do. And you know, I don't know exactly what the path is, but I just had such an extreme level of discomfort in every job I'd had in the year before I had started trying multiple of my own businesses, but I was like, you know, like I got to go and do my own thing. And so, you know, with COVID happening, that was, it was really, really weird timing. It was really weird timing. It was like, right, like the month before everything happened, I had quit my jobs. And then all of a sudden, like, yeah, like I would have lost my jobs anyways.
Yeah, like maybe good timing, right? Like,
yeah, but at the same time, I'm like, you know, I would have been able to get unemployment if I had stayed, but whatever. Like, it was done anyways. Yeah, but you know, there's pros and cons to all of it. But you know, in a way, it was really fun to, and not really, but it was a really good, it was good timing, but also kind of like, oh, was it? But you know, it happened, so it was good timing. But also another thing was that was my only option at that point, because once everything started opening back up, people are wearing masks. I can't, with my ears, I have bad hearing. I can't read lips when people have their faces covered with masks.
Yeah.
So
whoa.
I couldn't, yeah, like I was like, I can't go back into retail and hospitality because, and like being around a lot of other people because, or, you know, any job really where I'm around other people, because I can't, like, yeah, exactly. There's been a lot of embarrassing experiences so far. Like someone will say something and I'll have no idea who said it or who they said it to, but I'll answer them because I think they said it to me. And then they just look at me funny and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't tell who's talking.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what?
Oh, I was going to say, I think, so like one thing, you know, with Unbreakable Strength Co. and you know, kind of our mission, and like one of the things that we talk about a lot is disability, and the way that, you know, so much of the world, and I think, you know, admittedly, I hate that, you know, maybe we have to experience things for ourselves sometimes to really have our eyes opened. But, you know, like for me, you know, living with some permanent physical impairment and having to use like wheelchairs and things like that, it wasn't really until a few years ago that I realized like how inaccessibly the world is structured. And that's something like, you know, I think that we have really visible disabilities, which is where, you know, we need, you know, additional equipment or mobility devices or what have you. But with invisible things, it's like, I can't look and know maybe that your hearing isn't, you know, what's considered normal. And so then how do we, you know, make the world more accessible there? And like, what, with your experience with that, like what, yeah, it sounds like your solution is to work for yourself. And I feel like that's true for a lot of people that live with that stuff. And it's like an exciting opportunity to be able to work for yourself, but also I would imagine that that's like frustrating too, right? Like you mentioned, like people look at you and it's like, you shouldn't have to like explain to every person that you've like answered, like, oh, well, here's the deal is like, I answered you because these things, like, that's not fair. Like, how do you, how do you like reconcile all of that, I guess?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I do believe that even if I wasn't hearing impaired, I would still take the entrepreneurship route. But my
Yeah.
hearing impairment and COVID and the masks and all that kind of stuff happening at all the same time kind of sped up the process, because I was like, well, because I could have gone back to found another job, gone back to work, done whatever, and I would have put off all of this other stuff that I should have been working on. It would have been a distraction and all that, but I really didn't have an option. So that was kind of, I'm thankful for it. It all worked out really well. That's for sure. And looking back now, I'm glad it worked out like that. But yeah, in terms of having a disability that people can't really see, it's, I never thought about that I hadn't thought about that until I was probably like 10 to 12 years old. And I had been hearing impaired my entire life. And I remember having to deal with the frustrations of other people a lot without really understanding it. And I had a doctor tell me, like, when you're blind, or you can't tell if every blind person is blind, but a lot of times you can kind of see they have like, either a stick or glasses, or there's some kind of, and not even blindness, it can be any other kind of disability. You can see it.
Signifier.
Not all of them. Yeah. And this isn't like, I don't mean to compare things, but because you can have any disability and see it or not see it. But that was the example the doctor used, that like people will jump out of their way to help you because they can see it. Whereas if they can't see that you're deaf or you're hearing impaired and they talk to you and you ignore them, they get really annoyed with you because they don't see the disability and they just think that you are ignoring them, or they just think that you're not a nice person, or they just don't even really think, they just get annoyed. So
kind of like make it about themselves, right? Like me, like you should hear me.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I think actually Laura was around this one time, but like there was one of our friends that I don't even remember who it was. I don't even know if it was a friend or just someone who was there, but she had been talking to me and I didn't answer her. And then finally I did. And then she's like, what, are you deaf or something? And I was like, yeah.
Or something. Yeah.
Like, so it's kind of funny. Like, I don't feel bad when people like ask that, because like, and then they feel bad when they say that. So I'm like, you don't need, like, no one needs to feel bad. Like, let's just all be nice here. But at the same time, I do see that frustration. And I've gotten used to it personally. Like if I cause other people frustration because they're not speaking loud enough for me to hear them, like that's on them. Like I can't even hear them, so I can't hear them to be frustrated.
Right.
But it's definitely, yeah, exactly. And I mean, it definitely caused some really funny experiences when I rode. I know that one of the coaches told me when I finally there were two of them. I told two of the coaches at first that I was hearing impaired. Well, I'd already been practicing for like a month and hadn't told them that yet. And they were just like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. We just kind of thought you were a little slower than everybody else. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And they were like, well, when we would say to do something and, like sit forward at the catch or whatever those other rowing terms are, everyone would do it. And then you'd be like a half a second behind them. And I had to laugh because I was like, yeah, I didn't realize I did that, but I do. If I can't hear in like big groups, I don't hear. Yeah, like in big groups, I don't hear very well. So I follow what everyone around me is doing and then I do it. So there's like that really slight lag, but I never noticed it. And then, there's a situation where one of the coaches came up and talked to me and I guess I just walked away from him and he was like, well, I know you didn't just ignore me. But then another teammate walked up and said, hey, by the way, she can't hear you.
I'm not sure what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. How do you think like, if you had maybe a piece of advice or like something that you would like to see in terms of, like improving accessibility or like, I think, you mentioned like saying like, oh, what are you, deaf or something? Like, I think we use language that's really like ableist inherently, maybe without really realizing it a lot of the times. And so other than, reframing our language or like, in the case of COVID with, wearing masks, maybe that have like a visible, that don't have a barrier to like seeing someone's mouth move. How would you maybe make the world more accessible for people with hearing impairment?
Honestly, and I think this goes for all impairments, but I think that in terms of personal responsibility for everyone on this earth, it is just to be understanding because, most people actually really do have their thing. Like not everyone's necessarily living with a disability, but a lot of people are, and you'd never know. And so when you say things, like when you say things that you don't think about what you're saying, and you like, I saw a picture the other day that was like, it said, you should be nice to people because here's a representation of their entire lives, and here's a representation of how much you know about it.
Yeah, and it's just this little clip of like a fraction of a moment. Yeah.
Exactly. So like what you know about someone is very little compared to like even just if someone's having a bad day. And, they say they either ignore you or they, get frustrated behind the wheel and they yell at you or something like that. Like, obviously, yeah, it's not very nice. It's kind of annoying to be treated like that. But at the same time, you're like, you don't know, they might have just had to put their dog down. Yeah. Or if someone's ignoring you, you don't know, they might be hearing impaired, or, there's so many different things. And so a lot of it is just being understanding to everyone else, and also not taking things so personally if someone is not responding to you in the way that you want them to respond to you. And that's just like, even on an individual level, like I'm guilty of that too. And I think like I'm just super quick to react a lot of times. And it's just kind of something that I think is a societal thing, is being quick to react.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't pause. It's not like we're not taught to pause. We're taught to like, the person in front of you like doesn't use their blinker and you just like explode or what, whatever, it is, right? We're really impatient. How do you think, like, kind of on that line of understanding, how do you bring that, like, going back to your neurolinguistic programming and your coaching, it sounds like you really have a strong heart for others, and like you mentioned like it's you said something earlier that was basically like, it's the work I'm here to do. Which to me kind of, it implies this level of, like, not like destiny necessarily, but it's like we all, I think, have something that like is on our heart that really feels like that's how we're made to like serve the world, or that's our like thing beyond ourselves that we do. So like, how do you think that you carry all of that back into, coaching people on mindset and to helping people grow?
Yeah, well, kind of what you said a second ago, I do believe in a sense of destiny, and I don't know if that's the right word, but I do believe that if we desire to do something, or if we have this like burning passion of like, I want to do this, like I have a feeling this is the path I need to follow, it's because we're supposed to, and we all have different ideas of what we want to do. And when you follow that path of, this is what I want to do, this is what I feel like I am called to do, like what really lights me up and excites me the most. Mm-hmm. When you follow that, you're not only going to have your best life and live your happiest life and live to your fullest potential, but you're going to give the people around you permission to do the same. You're going to inspire them to do the same. Yeah. And I also believe that is not very well taught in our society. It's kind of just this idea of like, you need to go do this because I told you to. You need to go do this because that's just the way things are. You need to go do this. You can't do this if you wanted. There's just all these rules. Yeah. But really, there's no such thing as rules besides the rules that we make for ourselves and we live by. And so my whole thing with mindset coaching is being able to see the highest potential of each person, because it kills me to see, it makes me so sad to see people who have these ideas and these dreams and these visions and ways that they want to live their life and things that light them up, but they just say they can't do it because they're for whatever reason, like, oh, well, that doesn't make enough money. Oh, well, that's too risky. Oh, well, like I'm supposed to be doing this, or, oh, well, I don't know, like that's just a dream. Like, I'm just not that kind of person. And I don't believe that anyone is brought into this life to be put into a box to not live to their highest potential. And, highest potential is different for everybody. Sure. It really is. And a lot of people, and most people really are probably going to go through their entire lives without ever really being able to live in that. And I want to do my part to make sure that I can be a space and a coach for people who do want to improve their lives in whatever way that it is. And to me, that all starts with your mindset.
Yeah. I remember reading you saying like most people go through their lives like without ever really knowing this. And I think like, I remember reading this, I read a book on Buddhism, right? Like in high school, but I remember reading about this concept of the hungry ghost, and that like in all of us, we've got like a hungry ghost, and that like we operate out of, that's like ego and our desire for, for things or for approval or for, to consume. And I think that like, a lot of us live a great deal of our adult lives like out of that hungry ghost mindset, which is just like, I want to make money because I want to get a job, because I want to have a house, because I deserve, or and it like becomes about acquiring material possessions, about producing capital, and then like, yeah, we walk through life like fairly well, and then, how you mentioned like you were feeling lost in Colorado and you were just like, I had no feelings. Like I've been depressed before. Yeah. Like I felt like apathetic. And I think, so many of us get really stuck in that place, and that, there's such a need in the world for people like yourself that are like maybe helping other people lift the veil and like see like, you don't have to feel empty or like kind of spiritually unfulfilled in how you're spending your time or what you're pursuing. And that like, that there's no limit really. That's super cool. I think we're getting close to the end of our time today. So I think to close out, where can people find you for coaching, or if that's something that you've launched yet or something you plan to launch, where should we look for more info?
So I am still working on that. If we have a part 2, I would love to relay that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can go back and add it in too retroactively. I can definitely add details in after the fact.
There you go. And just a quick background on the coaching too, because I know it won't be for everybody. It has an overarching theme of spirituality and manifestation, but at the same time, I'm bringing in with it the tools to actually help people change their beliefs and actually tangibly create the results they want to create. And that's where the neurolinguistic programming comes into. Cool. But at the same time, I know that these terms and these kind of concepts aren't necessarily comfortable or make everyone comfortable. But that's my truth. That's what I'm doing. But yeah, so basically it's that overarching theme and that higher purpose that we had just talked about, but also how are you going to get there? Because I can't just say, oh, well, just change your beliefs and then your life will be, great. Which it's like you said, it gets simple, but it's not easy. Like that basically is the truth, but that you can't just undo 25 years of, beliefs or programs or all that kind of stuff just by saying it. So,
right.
So yeah, right, making it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like you said, it's like that stuff's not comfortable for everybody, but I think also like I would be hard pressed to think about like situations where I felt super, super comfortable and where I grew. Like, I think like we do our growth, like in that, like, ooh, I am not comfortable with this. And kind of like, even, on entrepreneurship, like, running a personal training business, like there are days where you wake up and you're just like, wow, who gave me permission to do this? And I know what I'm doing. And I think I know what I'm doing, but it's going well, I think, but I'm also very uncomfortable. And I don't know, I think like that place, if we don't shy away from it and we kind of embrace it, is like really where a lot of growth comes from. As a closing thing, I wanted to also kind of listen to like any recommended, like, are you reading anything or watching or listening to anything that you find really exciting that you think that we should read or watch or listen to?
So I've been really big into reading lately, and I put my books right here so I can remember the authors of them. So the book I just finished, and it's funny, it doesn't really have anything to do with what we just talked about, but I think it's a really interesting book. But it's 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. And that's by Jaron Lanier. Have you watched The Social Dilemma yet?
I have watched The Social Dilemma. That book title sounds very familiar. I feel like maybe it was recommended in that documentary or
it was. Yeah, so the author was in there talking a little bit, but yeah, that was awesome because it's one of those things where like just expanding your mind in a way that you've never thought of. Like I was reading a book from someone who actually works in these programs in these social media companies, and he's telling like what's going on in there. So whether you want to believe it or not, it's like this is what's going on in there. So that's pretty fascinating, and now it's helping me reevaluate my relationship with social media, because that's definitely a pretty. It can turn pretty unhealthy pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. Yeah, we could all probably use to step away from it more often.
Exactly. And then the book that I'm about ready to read is called You Are the Placebo, and that's by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And I'm still not exactly sure what it's about because I haven't read it yet, but it is basically using your mind to change things in your life, like the whole mind over matter and the whole science behind it. So it's not just like, oh, change your beliefs, which is obviously important too, but it's like, I mean, here, this is how thick the book is. So
it's tangible.
Yeah,
cool.
It's a thick book. Yeah. So it's like, it's going to have some tangible stuff in it. So I'm excited. I think that'll really help bring a lot of concepts into my coaching. And I just love learning all that kind of stuff. Anything with mindset, anything with spirituality, anything with, even you get science thrown in there, like especially with science thrown in there, because then you have tangible, like this is how it works. I love reading it. So yeah.
Very cool. And then I think finally, since it is like the Unbreakable Strength Radio, and there are so many definitions of strength, I think we can get myopic in our own field. So I think closing out, what does being strong mean to you? And is there anything related to that you'd like to share with us before we sign off?
Yeah, being strong to me is not comparing myself to others. It's doing things because I want to do them. It's starting a business, growing a business, running, doing whatever it is I want to do in my life because I want to. And it's bettering myself from a place of wanting to better myself, but not necessarily because I feel like I have to. It's not trying to be better than anyone else. It's not trying to look good. It's just doing it because it brings me joy.
Yeah. Yeah. Pursuing joy. Oh, I love that.
Pursuing joy.
Thank you so much, Regan. And I'll look forward to, we'll absolutely have to have you back on the show. And it was so good. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, I had so much fun. I'm excited for whenever part 2 happens.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye, Annie.
Bye.